All right, so this week we're doing Ruth Chapter 2. I don't know why I just went blank. We're doing Ruth Chapter 2. It is a little bit different than our normal way of, at least as far as at least while I've been doing the prep class, it's kind of an oddity. Usually I try and break up the chapters according to usually the different little subheadings that you'll see in your Bible, and take it chunk by chunk. However, this week Ruth 2 is just one chunk, and so it's going to be a little bit different, and we're still going to go through the Word, but we're I try to highlight themes and some of the themes that are occurring here and that we can see here. But I'm just going to be honest, this chapter was also kind of weird to try and come up with some introduction or easing you guys into the conversation. So what I did do under that focus attention spot, I came up with kind of 3 different lines of questionings. They overlap. They're all kind of the similar thing. But I did one that's similar to kind of some of the questions Naomi is facing, some of them, the questions Boaz is facing, and some of the ones Ruth is facing. Just because this week we finally get to our 3rd main character, Boaz, and we see a lot from the character of Boaz, and I've tried to highlight that with some of the themes. But let's go ahead and get started. Would someone like to volunteer to read Ruth chapter 2, verses 1 through 7?
Now Naomi had a relative of her husband's, a worthy man of the clan of Amalek, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain after him, in whose sight I shall find favor." And she said to her, "Go, my daughter." So she set out and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers. And she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the clan of Amalek. And behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem, and he said to the reapers, "The Lord be with you." And they answered, "The Lord bless you." Then Boaz said to his young man who was in charge of the reapers, Whose young woman is this?" And the servant who was in charge of the reapers answered, "She is the young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab." She said, "Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves after the reapers." So she came, and she has continued from early morning until now, except for a short rest.
All right, thank you, Jay. So these first couple of verses open us up. I won't jump into some of the themes quite yet, but what stands out to you guys just from these first 7 verses?
This is kind of a continuation from last week that we're continually reminded Ruth is a foreigner. Verse 2, Ruth the Moabite. We get down to, what is it, verse 6. Yeah, the woman, she is the young Moabite woman from Moab, right, toward the end of the verse. And it continues throughout the chapter and, in fact, throughout the book. It's just a continual reminder that she's an outsider.
You think that speaks of some kind of perhaps prejudice by the locals as they refer to her that way? I mean, because that in a way that's significant in that there's another obstacle she has to overcome.
I think of it in terms of the big picture of Ruth, where she eventually is the redeemer of Naomi, bears a son, and through that line comes David. And so it's a reminder of what God does. I mean, when God wants something to happen, it's going to happen. It doesn't matter if she's a if she's an outsider. In fact, it seems like with God, the more outsider you are, the more likely he is to work his ends through you. Outsider, some neglected, and so forth, all the things that we've seen through the patriarchs, we've talked about with the barren women who suddenly have children, the younger son who becomes predominant over the older ones. God works in unexpected ways using unexpected people. And so we're continually reminded Ruth is an outsider. She's not someone that we would have expected, by the time we get to the end of the story, that, oh, she's in the lineage of David.
Well, and that's the part that stood out to me. Verse 3 uses a phrase in different translations. As it turned out.
Yeah.
It just so happened. There's the providence of God shining. This was not accidental. It was providential.
I think human agency, hard work matters. It's very clear in verse 7. Everybody has taken notice, and it gets further down in the chapter too, but everybody has taken notice, right? She remained from morning until now, and she's been sitting in the house a little while, right? It'll continue. She's going to continue to work, and she's working hard, and they take notice. And later on, she has done a kind thing for Naomi. People have noticed not just her character, but her work. It matters.
One of the interesting things that develops over the course of the next couple of chapters, when we're introduced to Boaz, what is the phrase that's used to describe him? He's a worthy man. Okay, and if you flip over to chapter 3, verse 11, when Ruth is talking with Boaz, or Boaz is talking to her, "And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you ask, for all my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman." And so in the grand scheme of the story, they're appropriately paired. He's a worthy man, she's a worthy woman, and all the things like Chess was talking about that we see starting here in verse 7 and continuing on indicate her character. So she has, Boaz's character is being shaped by his greeting. He comes, "The Lord be with you." His workers respond, "The Lord bless you." When is this taking place? In the time of the Judges? Does that sound like Judges kind of stuff? If you've read Judges, this seems like it's extraordinary. It's different. It's special. So they're building up. The writer is building up the big picture of who these people are and the environment in which they work and live.
In chapter 1, it's really interesting because there's got to be something about Elimelech and Naomi that everyone noticed that she came back. You know what I mean? There's just got to be, and you start to see that when you see that Boaz is this great person and he's in the line. You know what I mean? It starts to paint that picture of the reason it was a big deal and everybody knew it was her is because they were prominent. There was some reasoning behind this. And so it's interesting to see how that story plays out. That's where my mind went first. The other thing, my Bible has a note, and I think it's interesting. I'm going to share it. It says, in the Old Testament, God used several welfare programs to help poor people. One, reflected in this passage, was the command to leave some of the harvest in the field for the poor to gather. Poor people didn't beg for handouts, but worked for what they got. Gleaning was humiliating and sometimes very dangerous work. A single woman and a foreigner showed courage by working in the fields, and her diligence soon attracted the foreman's attention. So this is not the picture they're painting. You can see it as just I'm kind of walking along picking things up, but it was hard work is what we need to see it as. And I think to what we were talking about, what Bruce was leaning into as well is, she's just now resting. She's been working hard for hours. I think all of this paints a picture of of that. And why is Ruth working so hard is because she wants to take stuff back to Naomi. That's her goal, is how do I take care of my mother-in-law? And that's, the whole picture is very beautiful about what we're learning about her here.
In verse 7, she asked before she did it. There's another thing in her favor. But she also asked to do more than just glean. She asked to be able to take some from the sheaves that had been bundled.
Is there something of a very practical nature for us to grab hold of as far as the importance of nobility and being worthy people and living lives of high character and working hard? I mean, what's God saying through the lives of Boaz and Ruth about that? Because I think he's saying something very significant.
Think about how a lot of people respond to adversity in our culture, and have for a long, long time. It's not unique to us. But you turn on the TV, you click on stuff on the internet, all the news that's around us. When people don't have what they want, they go take by illegitimate means. In many, many cases, I'm not saying everybody does it, but that's a standard response. Life owes me. Ruth lost her husband, left her home, returned with Naomi, who had nothing else really to offer her except companionship. And her response is to go work hard and try to take care of Naomi and herself in the process. But to your question, it seems like our own attitudes toward whatever positions we find ourselves in life is important.
I was just thinking about the Sermon on the Mount. I mean, Jesus is, blessed are the poor in spirit, theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, they will be comforted. Blessed are the gentle, right? I mean, he goes through this, and it's like, Ruth fits a lot of those. And in verse 12 of Ruth, it's, may the Lord reward you for your work. Your wages be full from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to seek refuge. He's not, Boaz isn't taking credit. It's not, you've come to me. It's not even that. It's, you go back to Ruth 1, and it is, she said, your God will be my God. She is, it's faith, it's trust, and it is exuding out of her. It's like she walks into the room and the dynamics change, it seems like. She may have been really pretty too, but the point is like she walks onto the field and everybody notices. Who knows why, but it sure seems like it's hard work, it's faith, it's boldness. I mean, she's asking for sheaves when that probably is not the way to do it, but she is confident, it seems like, and really humble. So
we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, but you pointed out the verse 12, and that she keeps asking Boaz. I mean, there's a negotiation going on between them here about who she is. When Boaz first arrives, he says, whose young woman is this? And when he first interacts with Ruth, she becomes my daughter. And eventually she says, for you have comforted me and spoken kindly to your servant, though I am not one of your servants. Hint, hint. I'd really like to be one of your servants so that I can benefit from this relationship on behalf of Naomi. And Boaz finally gets the hint. We'll get there in a few minutes.
Well, since we're already starting to jump forward,
sorry.
Would someone like to read verses 8 through 16? And we can just jump to where we're already talking to.
So Boaz said to Ruth, my daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in another field, and don't go away from here. Stay here with my servant girls. Watch the field where the men are harvesting, and follow along after the girls. I have told the men not to touch you, and whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars the men have filled." At this, she bowed down with her face to the ground. She exclaimed, "Why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner?" Boaz replied, "I've been told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother in your homeland and came to live with a people you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wing you have come to take refuge. May I continue to find favor in your eyes, my Lord," she said. "You have given me comfort and have spoken kindly to your servant, though I do not have the standing of one of your servant girls." At mealtime, Boaz said to her, "Come over here, have some bread and dip it in the wine vinegar." When she sat down with the harvesters, he offered her some roasted grain. She ate all she wanted and had some left over. As she got up to glean, Boaz gave orders to his men, "Even if she gathers among the sheaves, don't embarrass her. Rather, pull out some stalks for her from the bundles and leave them for her to pick up, and don't rebuke her." So Ruth gleaned in the field until evening. Then she threshed the barley as she had gathered, and it amounted to about an ephah. She carried it back to town, and her mother-in-law saw how much she had gathered. Ruth also brought out and gave her what she had left over after she had eaten enough. Is that as far as you?
16.
Oh,
Big good.
Yeah.
wow.
Above and beyond.
Overachieving. Yes.
See, that's what I find so remarkable about that has practical application for people in adverse circumstances today, is when you humble yourself to say, I'm going to work within God's timing, God's parameters, God's will, God's way. I know real life examples of people who have had sweetness happen to them because of it. That's what I see happening here, but I've also seen the other side, which is when people start grasping, trying to control, trying to manipulate, it doesn't end up pretty. And so I love Ruth's spirit here, and Boaz for that matter.
As I was knowing I was going to teach this week, we're going through a different thing in our small group that actually was going through this. The scripture, the part that stood out to me is 9. I have told the men not to lay a hand on you. Like, she's still seen as a foreigner. This is a potentially harmful situation she is in. And Boaz is continuing to put his arm around her and continuing to say, I will keep you safe. You know what I mean? And I think that there's value in that. It's not just that she's poor and she's following behind. Like, these people don't like that she's a Moabite. We're going to continue to hear that, for a while. And we're getting into the part where all this starts to flip around. But I just think it's an important part of what we're reading, that this is still a place where people are looking at her and saying, you're not welcome here. Like, we don't want anything to do with you. But it's also interesting because Boaz in 11 goes into, he's been doing his own research. He's been doing his own stuff. You know what I mean? Like, he's figured out who she is and he's learning who she is. So it's an interesting thing to watch how he starts to be her guardian redeemer, right? Like how he's becoming this redeemer of her. And so it's an interesting story. But it was the way I was studying it this past Sunday. It's a reminder that it is still it can be a hostile situation. So.
Well, he's very accepting of her. He lets her drink out of the vessels of water. She's a Gentile, that's a no-no. And then he invites her to sit down at the table and eat with him. And when you think about where he came from, his mother was a Gentile. So, he was probably more accepting than just about anybody else would have been. simply because he understood. He understood that that change of heart, that reliance to follow God, makes her just as holy as any of the Israelites would have been, maybe more so, because she made that choice then. It wasn't by birth.
It would seem that Boaz understood what Jesus referred to as I desire mercy, not sacrifice.
Exactly.
One of the things, and I highlighted this, it's the last thing on page 3. So I guess we'll work backwards through the outline. But it's this section, I couldn't help but read it and hear the alarm bells ringing of, this is Matthew 25, of what you've done for the least of these you did for me. Just because Ruth is hungry, she's thirsty, she's a stranger, she's bare, and yet Boaz is the one to invite Ruth to eat at his table. Not just come here to have some food, it's come eat at my table, and if you're thirsty, drink from my well. If you're a stranger, but I'm bringing you into the fold, you are going to be almost in a higher elevated spot than even some of the other women that I have who are working in this field. And we'll see in chapter 4, Ruth and Naomi will no longer be considered bare because of the relationship Boaz forms with them. And so it's a theme that it keeps popping up, but I thought it was interesting just how well Boaz fills that example. And I don't think it's a mistake that when we saw it last week, Matthew's one of the only, well, not one of the only one to record a genealogy with Ruth and with Rahab, and mentioned in the genealogy of Jesus Christ. And so it's, I think, no mistake that surely the story of Ruth and Boaz is somewhere in the back of Matthew's mind. Maybe not he's reading from Ruth and then writing down what Jesus said, but surely he's making the connection that Jesus was pointing out of, this is a story coming back from the Old Testament of what the people of God are supposed to be doing, because in those moments they are showing how they're treating God. And so that was the thing that stood out to me, because it is one of those main things in Ruth is, well, last week she willingly chose, I may be a Moabite and there may be some future with if I return to my family, and there may be some blessing if I follow the gods of Moab, because that's what my culture is supporting. But I would rather be a least of these among the Israelites than a member of a Moabite community. And so, I wanted to highlight that just because it is worth noting she did leave her people to go live amongst the Israelites, but now she is receiving the same things that she wasn't necessarily expecting to receive, but she's receiving the things that Jesus then will go on to instruct his disciples, his own personal followers. If you are not doing these things that Boaz does here, you're no true follower of me. I don't truly know you if you're not caring for the hungry, the thirsty, the stranger, the barren. The only two that he leaves off is the prisoner and the sick. But you can only do so much. It was the Old Testament. They didn't have Jesus right there with them. So that's one of the things I pulled out of here.
I do think your page 2, the messianic imagery, I think that's spot on. I think that's really good. Just I heard it put one time, the Lord of the harvest is serving. And what did Jesus do? You know, I mean, it's the same conversation. It's the Boaz, who owns the field, is bringing Ruth, the Moabitess, in, right? He's providing, he's taking care, he's kind, he takes notice. I'm a male, and I'm pretty bad at awareness in some of those things, and my wife can cut 3 inches off her hair and I might miss it, but he is paying attention, and he's aware. I may be a lonely single guy, but maybe that's why he's paying more attention. But fact is he sure seems to be aware and recognizes kindness in a time when, in the time of the judges, he's not one of them, so to speak. So I think it's cool to see those connections as well.
We just keep seeing evidence that what the narrator says in verse 1, a worthy man,
Yeah.
we see it being played out when we're first introduced to him, the way he speaks to his foreman, the way they respond to him, the way he treats Ruth, the way he will continue to treat her throughout the story.
Sure.
He's a worthy man.
Well, he's being God's agent of mercy to Naomi and to Ruth. However, his mercifulness is going to be rewarded because, as you pointed out earlier, we don't know. It doesn't say if he was a bachelor who was looking to end his bachelorhood, but he was about to with a worthy woman. And maybe he'd been looking for that much of his life. And he wouldn't compromise. And God brings her out of nowhere. I mean, that's a fascinating thing even of itself. He said, where am I going to... they didn't have jets to fly around the world to find. He'd probably gone through all the women in Bethlehem. Where am I going to find somebody? Got her. She comes out of nowhere, a Moabitess.
And I've heard about her. I know about this person that's with Naomi. But when he comes to the field, he doesn't recognize her. He hasn't seen her. He just knows of her. And then he goes, oh, she's the one. And then we have the exchange that they have. They're just little things stand out to me. I don't know how, they build toward the whole, but I don't know if it's something to make a big deal about. But what did Naomi say? The Lord has dealt very bitterly with me, for I went away full and he brought me back empty. We're going to talk about how she's restored later and filled, but think about how Ruth is described after the lunchtime thing. And she ate until she was satisfied and even had some left over. And when she goes home, we're going to read it. I'm getting ahead again, but right. There's more of that imagery there.
Not just full though, like
Running over, abundant.
Yeah.
Which, since we've already mentioned it,
Great job, guys.
yeah.
I'm flogging Bergan through the class.
Before we read the rest, I did want to that's again one of those moments of, it's that messianic imagery, because, well, I know at least I pointed out in our study of Luke, but when you have these stories of feeding the 5,000, it says no one went home hungry. Then they still had 12 baskets worth of food. Like it's one of those lines that it doesn't make sense why it's there. It could be just throwaway line if you're reading this for the first time in Judea, but for us, it's not a throwaway line. Where have we heard this before? It's in the Gospels, and it's in other places within the Old Testament. It's showing up again. Surely this has to be a representative of a man of this line is going to provide for us to where we are abundantly overflowing. Sure, it's not necessarily we're always going to be full of food, and we can just not worry about having to grow food ever again because God's just going to provide it. No, there's that spiritual food, because I didn't include it in the messianic imagery, but we could even say when Boaz is offering to Ruth this water that he has, it also kind of sounds like John 4 of, I have water that you don't even know about that I want to offer you. And the woman thinks you're crazy. Like, what other water is there? It's just this well. And what do you mean living water? And you get into it of, it's just those moments that we've kind of mentioned it a little bit with Joshua, of how there's a whole lot of these curses, these bad things that will happen to Christ. Were the bad because that's what they did to the Canaanites. It's a bad thing because, well, it was a form of punishment, of disgrace to be hung on a tree, and to be not buried. You're just thrown in a cave, and a round stone rolled in front of the cave. Well, it's still for us reminding us of the gospel, and I think we often forget that the Old Testament can do that. Just because we think, well, that's the Old Testament, why would it ever reference anything in the New Testament? It comes years later. Well, no, it's all connected, and it's just those moments of, I feel like we need to point them out more often than not. But since we have already made the jump, I'll go ahead and read verses 19 through the end.
Can I make one more quick thing?
Sure.
You referenced the gospel. He's not mentioned explicitly here, but God's grace is the real star in this chapter, because he's showing up everywhere. Now he's working through people, but he's the one who's showing up and demonstrating the gospel that will come through the Messiah. It makes me wonder how often he's doing the same thing here in our lives, and we don't recognize it, and therefore don't give him credit for it. But he's the star here. His grace, so active, is the star here.
I think it's a good point to make about life in general, Dale, but also about this is we need to choose the lens that we look through.
Yes.
Right? I can decide to go through life and just, it's all circumstance. Or I can choose to go through life with a lens where I'm looking for the spiritual things. And even when God's not specifically mentioned, I can see this grace and this mercy and this thoughtfulness and this, all of these things, and go, those are all things that come from God. That's not a circumstance. It's not coincidence. You know what I mean? Like, it's a great point because there's a couple of books in the Bible, Old Testament, that we look at and go, God's not really mentioned. And I'm like, those are some of those spirit-filled books in the Bible. Like, you got to look through it. You got to choose the lens that you look at these scriptures in. Because when you look through that spiritual lens at just the scriptures we just read, you can see God completely evident in this, because that's where it comes from. Yeah, that's good.
All right. Starting in verse 19, it reads, "And her mother-in-law said to her, 'Where did you glean today? And where have you worked? Blessed be the man who took notice of you.' So she told her mother-in-law with whom she had worked, and said, 'The man's name is with whom I work today is Boaz.' And Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, 'May he be blessed by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead.' Naomi also said to her, 'This man is a close relative of ours, one of our redeemers.' And Ruth the Moabite said, 'Besides, he said to me, you shall keep close to my young men until they have finished all of my harvest.' And Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, 'It is good, my daughter, that you should go out with his young women, lest in another field you be assaulted.' So she kept close to the young women of Boaz, gleaning until the end of the barley and wheat harvest, and she lived with her mother-in-law." All right. One of the things since we've hit pretty much the other two, another thing that I pulled out of this section is this idea of blessings. I know we've hit on it a lot, especially with some of those past couple of weeks in Joshua. And then we kind of talked a little bit about curses last week, just with some of those curses of what's to happen to Israelites if they form relations with Moabites. What are some of the things that, by rejecting the promises of God, what curses are you taking on for yourselves? And we really hit Deuteronomy 27 and 28 probably more in the study of Joshua and Ruth than we probably would have if we were studying Deuteronomy, just because Deuteronomy is much longer, and we would need more time for everything that's in there. But this idea of blessings, we haven't really hit on as much, or at least not in the way it's used here in Ruth. The blessings we see here, and I listed three, are more personal. And there's three different personal forms of blessings. In verse 4, we get an exchanging of blessings between a master and his servants. And it's just one of those things that made me have to stop down and think of what kind of relationship or what kind of individual do you have to be that your servants are blessing you, and you just as much as you are blessing them. And I started to think of, and I listed some questions there, and it's more on the third page. But do we even have relationships like that with our contemporaries? Like, where we're not their boss, we're not their master, but is there a coworker, a friend who would, if you say, "The Lord bless you," and to the sense of, I wish that God does all the good things that you wish for, and I'm going to invoke God's name for your blessing, would they say the same thing back to you? And sure, you may think of one or maybe two, but again, that even goes to highlight how rare this dynamic is. Boaz is someone's boss, and so sure, Boaz, you can say that, and it's not weird, but in this culture, you didn't really have favor with your boss unless he was paying you better. And I'm sure if some people, if they have a less than appreciative work life, they have the same idea of, why should I be happy when my boss succeeds? Because he's not going to ever tell me good job. But in this situation, we see Boaz is willing to not only give blessings, but is also a man deserving of receiving blessings in this relationship. But another one that comes from that verse 11, verses 12, where Boaz recognizes the situation Ruth is in. He's recognizing something, and he's willing to invoke God's name and invoke a blessing upon her in the sense of, you're right, you are someone deserving of blessing, even though you're deserving of your blessings because of all you've gone through. It may not be things that everyone else values, but I am placing value on it because God's placing value on it. And so bless you, Ruth, for that, because you are finding refuge amongst God's people and under God's wings. And then verse 19, we see it again of Naomi's expressing blessing, not because something Boaz has done for Naomi. It's something that she's asking for a blessing. She's expressing gratitude for Boaz because of what Boaz has done for someone else, for someone that Ruth has cared for. And so I did leave some questions there just to kind of think through it, because I don't know about y'all, but the times I've heard bless is usually because someone's sneezing, and so it's bless you, or you're coughing, and so bless you, or you're doing something really dumb, and so you get to bless your heart. And that is not necessarily what Naomi's not saying, bless your heart, Boaz, you're just doing everything so great. No, she's truly invoking God's name and God's influence here. And I think we miss a lot of, I guess, not only understanding, but we let our relationship with God kind of dwindle because we don't ask for blessing, and we don't necessarily receive blessing either. And so it's one of those we could spend a whole lot more times talking about just blessings and the different types of blessings, and then that gets us into anointing and all of that fun stuff. But at least while it occurs 3 times, and so at least in this chapter, it would probably be worth mentioning. there is something different than just saying bless you when someone sneezes happening here. And so that's what that's the last theme or point I kind of highlighted in the handout. But what did you guys think?
Kind of flowing from that, the thing that stood out to me is Naomi's response when she learns what is happening. You know, the last time she spoke, other than telling Ruth that it's okay to go out and glean in the very first part of chapter 2, the last time she spoke was, I'm very bitter. Look what the Lord has done to me. The Almighty has testified against me, brought this calamity upon me. And now, one day, one day Ruth goes out. She happens into the field. Boaz happens to come to the field that day. All these circumstances that are providential, as Dale pointed out earlier. She goes home. She talks to Naomi, tells her how her day went. And Naomi's response, first words other than "Go, my daughter," since the complaining and the lament. May he be blessed by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead. And so, like Zach was talking about, she has the lenses on now to interpret what has happened on this particular day. So Naomi now begins to see a glimmer of hope.
Yeah.
And she doesn't say, well, it's about time. It's, oh, I recognize the hand of God in this.
Which I think is kind of unique, at least for a lot of Bible characters. And I think even for us, I know I sometimes have to be hit upside the head several times to realize, oh wait, this is what God's doing in my life. And it's not the one day after one conversation, I just, oh, this is working because God's doing this. That God has made this work. And maybe that's just, it's an example of how our culture is so wildly different. And we can explain it away, or maybe it's just something of, it's a relationship issue with me and I need to do that. But I think we all kind of have those moments of sometimes it takes us either stepping out of the situation to realize, oh wait, this happened because of God's handiwork. And it's not always when we're in the middle of the situation realizing, oh, God's doing this right now, like Naomi. But we could also get in the debate of, well, did she really do that? Or was that just written that way? Which defeats the whole purpose, because it's a moment of a realization of faith, a realization of God's work in someone's life. To argue over semantics defeats the purpose. It ruins Scripture. But that's a good point, Bruce.
Do you think it's interesting? Because the story seems to go pretty fast in terms of, it's just, tell you the things, but, she gets an ephah. I think that's a lot. She takes it, she goes into the city with her mother-in-law, and you can imagine, right? She comes in, she's carrying this pack, strong, right? Obviously, Ruth has added that to her character traits, right? She's a CrossFitter. But she comes in and she's got her pack on, and she walks in the door, she drops the sack down, and Naomi's like, that is a lot of grain. I mean, you're like, what? Who did you rob? I mean, that's not the question, but it's like, wow, that's a lot of grain. And then it's like, well, I've got some roasted grain left over, and it even mentions, I think this is interesting, it says she took it out and gave Naomi what she had left after she was satisfied, right? And his mother-in-law said, where did you work, right? And then you pointed out that he said, may he be blessed. And it's like, she's like, what is happening? Well, Ruth doesn't know the story. She's like this nice guy, met him at the supermarket, and Naomi's like, you've really been blessed. Like, neither one of them know the full story yet. And it's going to start to come together. But it's like, neither know the whole story, but they're trying to figure it out. But it's some of the needs have to be met first. I mean, like, you've got to take care of family and relationship. You got to take care of food and famine, and God is taking care of them step by step. And it's family's the next one to be taken care of, right? They don't have family, they don't have food. Now they have food. What do we got to take care of now? Got to take care of the family, and Naomi's got a plan, right?
Yeah, like every chapter in the story, there's always something right close to the end that says it's a cliffhanger, right? Beforehand, what's going to happen to Naomi? She made it back. But what's going to happen to her? It's kind of the
Was this
question
the
they're
worst
asking.
one? And she lived with her mother-in-law.
Well, I was going back up to verse 20.
Don't publish that one.
Naomi also said to her,
You're on record now.
Yeah, you can
the
see
man
it.
is a close relative of ours, one of our redeemers. And so now you're going, okay. Even to our ears, even if we don't know what that is, it sounds like, well, maybe there's even something more yet to come here. And then we start chapter 3 for next week and find out. Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
That's why that lens is so important. That's why having truth tellers in our life is so important. To give us the correct lens with which to see what's going on around us. I love, Bergan, you referring to the 3 blessings, because I think that they teach us something about giving blessings. To just say, I mean, it's fine just to say to someone, God bless you, and mean it. But really,
Bless you.
Yeah. Did you mean it? Did you mean it? But what we see here are people who were very deliberate in expressing a blessing. I know what you've done with your mother-in-law. I know what you've done. That guy who let you come in this field, that guy deserves a blessing. And so what I'm saying kind of is, being agents of blessing is a powerful ministry. But when we do it, we have to give some thought to it and be very deliberate about what we say to bless other people in really meaningful ways. And it is powerful.
Another thing on that, it's one of those weird. I'm trying to find words to describe what I'm trying to say. It's one of those things I think we sometimes miss, kind of building off a blessing, but even building into our prayer time. We usually come with a list of, God, I need you to do this, I need you to do that, can you do this? Help me do this, help me, or it'd be really nice for me, and it's I-centered. A lot of what these blessings are is invoking it for someone else. Sure, that first one in verse 4 is kind of weird to think about well, sure, Boaz is asking, God bless my workers, and then the workers are saying, well, God should bless you too. But then it's one of those, well, Boaz asks God, bless Ruth for what she has gone through. Let God serve you in this moment. And then Naomi says, God bless Boaz for what he has done for Ruth, and by extension, what he's done for me. I think, again, we can blame culture, we can blame generations of shifting in faith or whatever, but it's one of those, I think we miss that part of not only giving blessing, but it's that part of our prayer life of how often do we go and ask God only for things for someone else. Because at least I know I can start off with just praying for other people, but eventually I'm going to get to the things that I want to also have happen, and it's one of those. Sure, we should take everything to God in prayer, but it's still one of those. They have a relationship with God where they're not focused on God. I know you're going to take care of me, so I don't even need to bring this up. I want you to make sure these people get blessed. I want you to truly help these people out because of what they have been able to do for me or work with me or however we want to say it. But I think that's all I had on that point, but I am also seeing some puzzled faces. So if I need to explain it more, I can.
Well, that's what selfish entitlement steals from us.
Mhm.
If I think everything good in my life is something I deserve, and why did it take so long, then I'm not going to have any sense of gratitude or that you have blessed me. It's about time. Why didn't you do this earlier? And that's something that, a lot of people apparently struggle with, is this sense of entitlement, selfish entitlement, that, aren't you guys here for me? I mean, it is about me, isn't it? And when you have that mentality, you not only, again, you have an absence of a grateful heart, but you can't bless others because you can't see how you've been blessed. Starting to preach there, so a little bit.
Yeah, it felt weird. You were making really intense eye contact with me. That's
what I'm telling you. I had that call.
I got a special message for you tonight, Bergan.
I guess. Which is weird because we were agreeing with each other. All right, we've just got a couple more minutes. I don't want to let anyone who has just been sitting on something to say and not be able to say it. So I'm looking at you, Jimmy, and I'm also looking at you, Jonathan. You guys have been quiet. Is there anything out of here that you've really just been waiting for the time to speak?
I don't have anything super duper to say. I agree with you guys. I thought that was interesting that they both keep everything in God's perspective the whole time. I thought that was cool, but I don't really have anything super duper or insightful.
Me Jay?
One thing. So, I don't know, I've always thrown this up to the culture that we are simply more reserved. Because you look at the back here, they would express it. In fact, to the point of it was something bad, they tear their clothes. I've yet to see anybody tear their clothes in church or something. Is it just our culture, or we kind of like put our thumbs down on our whatever thing? Question.
I don't know, dude. But I'm thinking about it.
Okay.
I think it's easy to say it's culture. I also think it's, well, I guess this also bleeds into culture. And this community has such a great relationship with God that no one's batting an eye when, oh, Jay's tearing his clothes again. He may need to stop tearing his clothes. Well, no, they understand it's a huge sign in a culture that you have maybe 2 or 3 outfits and you're tearing one because you're so distraught. You're so emotionally, like you have nothing else to do. You're not going to go punch some boulder because that's going to destroy your hand. But it's one of those, how else am I supposed to express my frustration, my anger, my lament? Well, I can tear my clothes. It is a possession that is of value to me. And I'm just saying, I'm so upset that God, I don't know what to do. I need guidance. So I'm tearing my clothes, and I think we have our own kind of ways, but I do think it's one of those. It would be interesting if we had a relationship on a culture-wide level where there wasn't you have to awkwardly look around to make sure your waiter's not coming at the restaurant before praying. Like, it's one of those to where no one bats an eye if you pray in public. And some people don't. And some people don't do okay, we have maybe a couple minutes before the waiter comes, I need to pray now. But it's one of those, I think it's something to be said that we should be striving for a relationship with God that is so intense that there's no stigma behind emotionally crying out to God. There shouldn't be a stigma about talking to God, in period, let alone feeling comfortable to say out loud or in front of people, God, I'm struggling, or I need something, or God, I want you to bless someone. I want you to do this for someone else. And so that was just the bell. So that one thing did take us to time. So thank you, Jay. And thank you guys for being here. Go and make this lesson your own.